In this episode, I'm talking to Meredith Cairns-Palmer. She is an intuition-led business owner and coach, and she helps women rediscover their joy for work and life again. And she really helps people tap back into their emotions, reconnecting to themselves and their innate wisdom of who they are and what they came here to do. She's got over a decade of experience in coaching and well-being, and just like me, she's very fascinated by human behaviour and why we do the things we do and behave the way we do. And both of us, she loves seeing women thriving. So I actually met Meredith at a local networking event for ADHDers, and we talk in this episode about the importance of finding your people, us sparkly folks, as she puts it. And this is actually the first episode highly sensitive me has cried in. So we talk about her journey of being recognised for having ADHD later in life and the struggles that she's had to overcome around that, and how we reconnect to ourselves in such a disconnecting society and the beauty of what we gain when we do. Plus, there are some helpful tips on how to be more self-compassionate. Thank you for tuning in to the Calm Your Nervous System podcast, where you will learn to regulate your nervous system, not just calm it. I'm your host, Jenny Adams, and I'm a somatic coach who has recovered from debilitating ME and trauma. Alongside my guest experts, I'm here to share tips, stories, and debunk jargon, what is somatics anyway, about how you can regulate your nervous system so you don't have to live with chronic illness, burnout, or debilitating trauma for the rest of your life. A joyful life is possible. Hello, Meredith, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And as we have just been giggling about, we've had a very ADHD start to this podcast already. I left my tabs open, and then you'd logged in earlier. I'm like, why is my computer talking? So yeah, we're coming with the energy that we're coming with today. So thank you so much for coming along. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And appreciate coming along with whatever energy is here today. Everything is welcome. And I'd love to hear a little bit about what it is you do, because I know you do some stuff around divine feminine energy, somatic stuff. So yeah, tell us a bit more about your story, what you do.
Okay, so I'm an intuition-led business owner and coach. That is a mouthful. And the way that I work is I help women who are struggling with being in the rat race and trying to pursue careers and modalities and things that just don't serve them. I think one of the things that I got caught in was trying to be someone that I'm not. I'm trying to be a go, go, go person, a rat race person, someone that was able to function at 12 hours a day. And so I tried to break free of that and move more into a lifestyle that suited me, following a purpose that's bigger than me, but led by me. And one that ultimately means I'm not chasing an identity or a lifestyle that doesn't suit me, if that makes sense. That's a very higgledy-piggledy way of explaining it, but I think that what I identified in my journey of kind of getting here was that I was doing what everyone else was doing, which was continuously trying to be something that I'm not, and burning myself out in the process. So yeah, I suppose to sum it up, I work with divine feminine energy, which is the opposite of what we're seeing a lot of in the world right now in terms of hypercapitalism, hyper burnout culture. And I work with presence and purpose and coming back to the essence of who you are and transmuting that into something in terms of work and lifestyle that is beautiful and fulfilling. And yeah.
I love that. And the word that's just coming to me is just living that authentic, aligned life. And for somebody that's maybe listening, that is maybe working full time, or they're running their own business and they are, like you say, burning out, just hustling, working their ass off. When you talk about this feminine energy and the kind of hyper capitalism that the world is in at the moment, how would somebody know, like, what is this feminine energy? What's the divine mean? What is this?
So it's one of those things that's quite hard to define, really. It's the divine feminine energy. If you're someone that, let's say, is working in a highly taxing job and you are putting the needs of others before yourself, you are putting the needs of maybe your family before yourself, your boss, and there's a cycle of continual self-abandonment, then the divine feminine energy is the reverse of that. It's when you decide that you've had enough and you return to who you are, you return to your needs and what your wants are from your life. And I think everybody who you ask would give a different definition for divine feminine energy, because it's actually a very personal thing. It's what I would bring, what I would define as divine feminine energy, and what you would define as completely different things, because it's just a relationship you have with yourself, but it's a soft one. It's one that has compassion and presence and unconditional self-love. And so I think if you're stuck in a cycle of sort of self-abandonment and burnout and sort of lack of boundaries and people pleasing, the way that you might return to yourself is probably through a breakdown to start with, because you've probably got to the point where you're like, I cannot do this anymore. And the introduction of sort of divine feminine energy would be your investment in yourself through things like yoga, meditation, and just being present with whatever's there. It's like all of your insecurities and all of your trauma and everything, just sitting with that and really just giving that self some presence. And that's what the divine mother, the divine energy is.
Yeah, wow. I love that explanation of it as well, because I think the way I've seen the divine feminine energy, at least for me, and like you said, we've all got a different perspective, is that more nurturing, but that nurturing can be outward or inward, and often it is outward, and like the receiving energy as well. You know, I'm deserving of receiving and being open to things. It's not the constant giving and doing and externally pushing out energy. And yeah, you know, as I'm sure you're aware, we've all got this, right? So what is it that brought you to this work, as is often the case with a lot of us, like you mentioned? Was it a breakdown? Was it, this is too much, can't keep going?
Yeah, it was probably 56 of those.
Wow. Okay. You went hard then. So did I.
Yeah, it kind of, when it hits hard and when you go hard in terms of the breakdowns, that you have the biggest of shifts, I think. But yeah, no, so I don't really know what I was going through at the time, but when I was about 17, I was just doing my best at absolutely everything, and it didn't feel like I was getting anywhere. It felt just like the walls were closing in on me. And I was, trigger warning, suffering with quite a lot of depression and suicidal thoughts and things like that. And I really just didn't know where to turn. And I think what was probably happening for me was I was undiagnosed ADHD, undiagnosed dyspraxia, dyslexia, undiagnosed complex PTSD as well. There was so much going on for me, and I just, bless me, was, instead of figuring that out, just beating myself to a pulp that I couldn't perform in the ways that other people were. So yeah, there was just a lot of self-deprecation for years and years and years and years, to the point where I just felt like the world was closing in on me and I didn't want to exist anymore. And so I reached out to someone who felt sort of like a friendly face. She was my mum's friend at the time, and I just said, I don't know why I'm messaging you. It just feels like you're the best person to ask. I don't want to exist anymore. There's no other way for me to put it. And she just She just said, okay, come round like tomorrow, and just sit with me and we'll see what we can do. And it turned out that she was training to be a coach at the time. She'd done a lot of sort of studying in human behavior and things like that. And within the space of 2 hours, it felt like she just lifted the world off of my shoulders. It felt like I could breathe, and I felt like I could actually step forward and feel okay in life again, which, yeah, that was huge. And so ever since then, it kind of just became a bit of a passion project. I went to university and studied marketing, and during that time was sort of so invested in personal development. I was watching TED Talks in my free time, and I was just obsessed with everything to do with the human behavior and why we perform in certain ways. Why do we do this? Whilst obviously being on my own healing journey. And at the time, one of my closest friends there, she went through a mental breakdown. And I sort of turned to her like, okay, I've done this, let's go. And I just regurgitated a lot of the information that I'd learned over the years. And I also just held space for her as much as I could. And over the course of 2 years, we got to the end of university and she said, Mez, why aren't you doing this for a living? And I was like, I don't know. That was a really good shout. So then I studied, and yeah, I've been in the game. I've had my business now for about 3 years, and it's a funny thing. I think when your work is so close to who you are, it's like it's not just a business journey; it's also a personal journey. And I think some days feel amazing and like you're on top of the world, and other days not so much, which I'm sure you can relate to.
Oh yes, yes, I totally get that. And this is one of these sorts of professions that you can't just turn up with a crap night's sleep and just kind of, bodge your way through the day. You have to kind of bring your full self to the table to clients. And I remember one of the things I learned in one of my trainings was we have to be that clean mirror to reflect things back to people. And when that mirror is covered in our own shit, we're not able to do that.
Oh, yes.
And people, we have these mirror neurons in our nervous system, and like we feel each other, right? We know when someone's a little bit off, whether that's through, seeing them, we can co-regulate online. It doesn't always have to be in person. So yeah, we feel this stuff. And I also just want to touch on your journey, especially going through all of that when you were, late teens, early 20s, university. That's such a tough time in life anyway. And I know I went through a lot of stuff around that time as well. And I'm sorry you had to go through that. And to myself as well.
Yeah.
Nurturing our teenage selves. The fact that your intuition led you to your mum's friend, and that you had someone there to reach out to, and the courage to offer or to ask for some support as well. Like, I mean, that could have saved your life.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. I think coaching ultimately did save me in a way, in a really non sort of cheesy cliche way. But it did save me from myself. I feel I tried so many different things up until that point in terms of counseling and like therapy, and I just felt like I was talking to a brick wall in certain respects. So everybody is different. I feel that everybody needs a different approach, and I just found my thing and I ran with it and just became absolutely obsessed with it in terms of its capacity to really help people. So yeah.
So what would you say that thing is? Was it the catalyst of speaking to your mum's friend? Was it you following your intuition to go and speak to your mum's friend?
In terms of starting my business?
In terms of what actually helped you get out of that really difficult place?
Yeah, I think it was finding the thing that enabled me to exhale, I have to say. It was like I'd allowed things to get quite bad. And although I was trying at that time, I can remember I was at college and I was speaking to a counselor, and I was sort of doing my best with what I had, reaching out to whoever I could. But I think that was the first time having that conversation with my mum's friend. It was the first time I went, oh my God, I'm normal. I'm not crazy. I'm not, there's not something wrong with me. This is just like a normal experience that I'm mismanaging because I don't have the tools. So yeah, I think that having something that matched what it was, or having my experience validated, I guess, was like, okay, phew, this is okay. I'm going to be okay.
Wow. And that experience. I mean, I can relate to this. I'm sure a lot of people listening to relate to this, especially when you're neurodivergent, have ADHD, that sense of what the hell is wrong with me? Why can I not just do the things that other people can? Why am I struggling with this? Am I going crazy? All of that stuff. Oh, I can feel it in my body now. It's just so constrictive, and there's just so much sadness and shame for so many of us carrying that. And when we are recognized, when we are seen as our authentic selves, and like you said, that's reflected back to us. Oh, what a difference that makes.
100%. And I think that one of the biggest catalysts for change for me was the trust element. I think when you're neurodivergent and you are growing up in a world that is neurotypical, I think what had happened up until that point was like, I had attempted to be authentic in spaces, and I was either kind of rejected or refused or not. People kind of saw me as a bit weird and a bit like out there. And I think that for that reason, that's why I decided to continually put on these masks and be like, okay, if you don't like this person, then I'm going to be this person. And so I think when I got to 17, I think it's, what's the guy? Who's the guy? Jimmy, the guy in the films. There's a guy, a very famous man, and he talks about how depression is essentially your body's way of telling you that they're fed up of you wearing masks, or fed up of you not being yourself, essentially. And I resonated with that quite a lot, because I think up until that point, I had basically put on so many different masks, I didn't even know who I was anymore. And to a certain extent, that was because I felt like a little sparkly human, I like to call them sparkly. Neurodivergent people are sparkly.
And we love that.
I was showing everyone my sparkly self, and they were going, oh God, that's a bit odd. So having that sort of session with my mum's friend was the first time someone went, it's okay, you're normal, you're welcome here. And I was like, oh, thanks. So it was that really like exhale moment of I could be completely myself in a space, and someone was willing to validate and listen and just hear me, I guess.
Yeah, and the power of that. And if you are listening and you haven't found these people in your life, please go and find them, because this is such a validating experience. And you and me, we met when we were both at the local ADHD networking group, and it's a business networking group. And I don't know about your experience of it, but when I turn up, I just feel seen. Like, there's no masking. We can sit there and hold 3 different conversations with different people, and no one's going, hang on, what are you talking about? Can you slow down a minute? We're just seen in our full sparkliness. And it's amazing to be around other people. And I can see the new people that come in with the masks on, and they're apologizing for talking too much and being too much and just talking themselves down. And you can see, just by being around others and seeing this behavior modeled and this okayness, how quickly they then can just take the masks off to whatever level feels safe in their nervous system. And like you said, it's it's that sigh of relief of like, oh, okay, I'm normal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's funny actually, because I went along to the first one of those events. And my suspicion was that I knew I was dyspraxic and dyslexic. I've got a diagnosis for those, but I didn't know I had ADHD. I thought I had a little bit, but wasn't quite aware of how much I did have it. And I went along to the first one and I listened to 20 people talk about their experience with ADHD. And I cried for 2 hours after that meeting because
wow,
I was like, not only do I have it, but I just sat in a room full of the most interesting, wonderful people in the world. And if I've got it, that means I'm like them. And that's a good thing. So there was like so many layers of what I'd experienced in that mere 2 hours and how much that hit me in terms of feeling just like a likable human being, like a wanted, valid, likable human being. And so
and I'm feeling this now. This is setting me off because I know what this just giving myself a moment to let the tears be here because it is so validating and there's so many layers because we can be those amazing people in that room.
Exactly. And like recognizing that is huge when we're taught so much to criticize and like to suppress the parts of us that are a little bit weird and a little bit too talkative and too creative. And it's a funny thing. I think it's so important that you do find people that give you that space and make you feel like you're valuable, I guess.
Yeah. And I would add to that as well the sense of the value. And I don't know if you recognize this. When we're caught up in that rat race and the overworking and the overwhelm and the doing, that probably quite masculine energy, we're often chasing that validation and we're needing other people to validate us and tell us we're enough. And can you see the difference in, maybe you might call it the feminine, but the being seenness that's validating, but it's not like, oh, you're telling me I'm enough. It's you're reflecting this knowing that I am enough.
Yeah, I think it's what kind of springs to mind for me there is looking at the structures that we find ourselves in growing up in sort of Western world, neurotypical world, that sort of thing, hypermasculine world. And it feels a lot like the masculine side has maybe built itself a structure. If you think of like a city, all of the walls are very straight and it's sort of very structured, very linear. And what we try and do as neurotypical people is we try and fit into that structure. So we try and fit in, neurodivergent, I mean, we try and fit into the neurotypical structure, into the hypermasculine structure of like, I need to perform this way. I need to look this way. I need to act this way. And there's this really big sort of tie between being neurodivergent and being a woman, because those two things that are happening are kind of one and the same. As a woman, you look at the masculine structures and you're like, right, so I need to work on a 24-hour clock and I need to be able to completely bypass what my body is telling me in terms of hormones. And I'm just constantly trying to fit into a structure that wasn't built for me. And so my work has always been a sort of rejection of that and a kind of, excuse my French, but a bit of a fuck you kind of approach, because I don't want to continuously spend my life trying to fit into a structure that doesn't serve me or was meant for me. And that's where that burnout came from, because if I'm trying to run on a treadmill that wasn't built for me, of course I'm going to be absolutely exhausted. It's like that thing of like, if you try and teach us measure a fish on its ability to climb a tree, I felt like I was a fish climbing a tree.
I love that. Yeah.
And so you can call it what you want. My label has been divine feminine energy, but I suppose anyone's pursuit of rejecting what doesn't suit them and finding what does, in terms of going inward and building a relationship with yourself and saying what feels good, what makes me feel alive, what lights me up, what enlightens me, that sort of journey is one that's so important as a woman, but also as a neurodivergent person, because you are never going to find the validation and the success that you crave in this structured environment that doesn't suit you. It just won't happen, because ultimately all you're craving is your own validation. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it can have whatever label you put on it, but there's definitely a big relationship between the neurodivergent people and the females, and anybody who's sort of in a category that is suppressed or rejected by the world that we're in. We're all on the same journey of like, right, that's not working. What is working? How can we make this work for ourselves? How can we empower ourselves? How can we be compassionate and patient with what we have to offer and create a life that's beautiful from that?
Yeah, I love that. And I know we're a similar age as well. And I know our generation, like there's so many of us women, our ADHD is being recognised so much later in life, when we've already burnt ourselves out, or we've spent a whole lifetime masking or, adapting or trying to adapt and fit in with these, like you said, these structures, they just don't fit us. We get that burnout. It's exhausting. And one thing I'm really proud of is that there are so many of us in this generation that are saying, no, enough. This structure doesn't work for me. This trauma, this shit is not getting handed down to the next generation. We are dealing with our stuff. And I know some people might say, oh, you've all turned into sensitive snowflakes. Well, I would say, compassion, please, both ways. But how amazing that we're just not passing this down, because I'm sure so many of us, especially us women, can look to our mothers, our grandmothers, and further back, and there's just so much pain and hurt and just not being seen. And we're the generation that we are lucky enough now that we do have more choice, but then we can get trapped in just because we can do anything now as women, we try and do everything. Yeah. And it doesn't work, because no one can do everything. It's too much. And what you were saying about, coming back to ourselves and recognizing what we need, what we want, like how we want to spend our lives. How do you start? How do you even start to recognize what those things are and start to tap into them and know that is a possibility?
That's a beautiful question. I think it's definitely a process, or, through fear of using a word that I really hate, a journey. I think that it's essentially making an intention to decide to know yourself and stripping back all of the layers of the things that aren't you, making boundaries with things, people, and places and lifestyles that don't serve you or don't make you feel good, and just choosing continuously to honor whatever it is that does feel good. I think one of the things that I read about recently was an intuition day, which is essentially where you clear a space in your diary and you just say, on this day, I'm going to make decisions based completely on feelings. And I think, especially if you're a neurodivergent person, you've kind of spent your life telling yourself that you can't have things. So I can't have that, or I can't do this, or I've got to do this. And there's this kind of should mentality. I think that when you're in that should mentality, it's really hard to get to know yourself, because you've always put barriers on what it is that you're allowed or not allowed to do. So having sort of an intuition day and waking up and going, okay, I fancy having coffee from this mug because it feels good. And I fancy taking my shoes off and running through the woods. Or I fancy going for a drive, putting my music on loud and screaming at the top of my lungs. I think it brings in a practice of listening to whatever comes forth and trusting it and just running with it. And the more that you do that, the more that your internal navigation system, which isn't always up here. I think that we spend a lot of time in our heads, and actually when we build a relationship with our intuition and ourselves, the messages are a lot quieter. They're a lot like, I kind of like to do this. And then your brain's going, yeah, but you shouldn't because you're not. And you're validated. And you're like, okay, everyone, we're just going to follow this. You kind of acknowledge there's a lot of different motives and voices going on in your head and in your body. And there's all sorts of conflicting messages, allowing them all to be there and just running with the one that feels good, I think, is a start. I'd also say that building a relationship with yourself is sometimes best done in the realms of sort of a coaching or therapy setup. This is a very sort of niche example, but if you've maybe grown up with a critical parent or a parent that was very critical of themselves, you can often adopt that mentality. And what that does is when you're consistently criticizing your own approach and your own thoughts and your own way of being, is you kind of make yourself smaller. And so when you come from that place and you say, okay, I want to build a relationship with myself, the little tiny you is just going to go, but you've just been shouting at me for the last 20 years. So why am I going to show you who I really am? Mm-hmm. And so that's why sort of having a coach or a therapist might be able to coax you out of that space and enable you to be a bit more self-compassionate from a third person perspective.
And the message I'm hearing throughout this as well is, you know, how do we learn to trust ourselves again? And I love that you shared, you know, which mug do I want my coffee out of? Because I say similar to my clients, and it can be as simple as it's those those tiny weeny little nudges of like, what do you want for breakfast today? This or that. Which way am I going to drive to work? What song am I going to put on? What am I going to listen to in the car? Just like all these tiny weeny little decisions. What clothing feels right today? Because, you know, the strategy means we can put our clothes out the night before, and then in the morning we go, I don't feel like wearing that. Mm-hmm. And it's basic, simple stuff. Learning to tune in and listen to that part of us, that in time we can build that trust back up. That, like you say, for whatever reason, might have been eradicated because of a critical parent, trauma, all sorts of things, living as a neurodivergent person in a neurotypical world. Mm. And what can we gain when we get to know ourselves and trust ourselves and our intuition?
That's a beautiful question. I think it would be hard to sum up in one answer, I think, because when you've lived an existence of doing the opposite of that, I'd say it just feels hard. You feel disconnected because you're not in relationships that serve you, because they don't know who you really are. Life just feels a bit like a struggle, like an uphill struggle. Whereas when you choose to build a relationship with yourself and you choose to peel back the layers of who you really are, and you choose to hold your hand when things are hard, it's like you've been sat on needles your whole life and you suddenly sit on a cushion. It's like,
yeah,
it's just nice. Like, you start to show up in relationships and friendships as who you are rather than who you're trying to be. And the people that actually love you stick around and you build a closer relationship with them. You feel more connected. And the people who have been around, who are friends with the not so authentic version of you, leave. And that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. So like, okay, you feel connected to the people around you. Fantastic. You then go through, let's say, a hard situation where, I don't know, a hard period in your life. You get fired or you break up with your boyfriend, whatever it is. You no longer so much need to lean on things like coping strategies or like codependent friendships, or you don't need anyone because you've got your own back and you're like, okay, this is hard, but I can do this. What is it that I need right now? What am I leaning towards? How can I comfort myself? How can I nourish myself through this period? And so, yeah, I suppose reconnecting with yourself just makes your life so much easier. It makes everything so much nicer, which is a really butchered way of saying it's just bloody great.
Yeah. And I can speak from my own experience that this kind of other side, and there's layers to this, but being able to be that authentic, connected self more often than not. I know for me, I have got some awesome friends now that weren't in my life a few years ago when I had this mask on. I've had some incredible experiences, and I'm living that life of like, I like traveling. Fuck it, I'm going to America. I'm going to go do this thing. Whereas, maybe a few years ago, I would have shrunk. Oh, I can't do that. It's too much. I'm asking too. How am I going to do it? Like all of that. Now I'm just like, yes, I go off traveling and I do my things, and that's what brings me joy, and I love doing that. And it's very magnetizing to the people. The right people will come and find you, and they're like, "You're fucking awesome."
Yeah.
And the people that are like, "I want you to be like this," you're just nope, back off. And 100%. They feel that. They feel that. Ooh, no, don't want to be around them. Well, I don't want to be around you either.
Exactly, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and that being there for yourself, the checking in, I've got my back, I'm there for me. I can see how easy that can be mistaken sometimes for I don't need anyone else. And would you say that's a different energy?
Say that again, sorry. So the difference in energy in...
So the hyper independence, feeling like I don't need anyone else, I've got this, versus I'm here for myself, this more soft, evolved version.
Yes. So the hyper independent side, I think people become hyper independent when they lose trust with their support system. And so what they tend to do is build everything by themselves and only rely on themselves. And A, that's extremely lonely, but B, it's extremely taxing. Because one of our innate needs as humans is to be connected, and we require a community. I mean, back when we were in tribes, we required a tribe in order to stay alive, and we still very much function in that way. So being hyper independent goes against everything that our innate makeup. And I think the reason that we do that is because we feel let down by support systems in the past that haven't maybe supported us in the way that they're supposed to. So we try to build everything ourselves, and we're trying to build this life that supports us in a way that maybe our community would have if they were the right community. Anyway, I think when you decide to break free of that, you process the pain of what it feels like to have been abandoned or not let down by your support system, is that you realize on the other side is that what you were looking for was there all along. It was just that you weren't able to access it. You weren't able to access your own validation or the validation of the people around you. And it's that exhale again, like we spoke about at the beginning. It's that, oh, thank God, life doesn't feel like it's on hard mode anymore. And I can thrive in a community rather than just trying to function like by myself constantly.
Yeah. And I agree with everything you're saying. And I so see how much our society pushes us into this, every man for themselves. And, it's funny, like in summer, I look at our road and you can always hear like the man that gets the lawnmower out first, and then the whole street continues and they all get them lawnmowers out. And it's like, why does every single house on this one road have a lawnmower? Like, how about we live in this community where we share one? But we're so, I guess, conditioned that we have to have our own everything. we have to be fully independent. You know, leaning on anyone else, asking for support is a weakness.
That's it. And I think it's funny. What comes to mind there is like how our ego feels a bit like it's running the show at the moment. We're kind of living in an age where the ego is, I don't know if you've read A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah, we went to see him in Hawaii a few years ago. My other half is obsessed with that car. And he's always saying, that's the best book ever written, A New Earth.
Literally, it's insane. But he essentially talks about how the world that we're currently living in is an extremely heightened, hyper state of ego. It's the self. It's being recognized for my winnings and my success. And I did that. And I have these material things. And, you know, it's this like, and because of that, I think the repercussions of that is that we are abusing resources, and we are being bigots and just completely blind in the action that we're taking in terms of consumption and material gain and being the best, the richest. It's like, I think Jeff Bezos bought a yacht purely because I was watching something about the fact that like people who have yachts, if they find out that someone has a bigger yacht than them, they will buy a bigger yacht just to say that they've got the biggest yacht. It's like there was this for ages, there was this. And I just, you kind of look at it and you're like, are you for real? Are we a bunch of 5-year-olds? Like, what is going on? Like, when did the world go mad?
It's rich men like measuring the size of their dicks.
Literally,
but like
it's a dick
on a
contest.
Giant scale.
Like, quite literally.
Really?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that what is eventually going to happen, and this is kind of what Eckhart Tolle sort of says, is that will diminish when people realize that things like connection and sort of authenticity and survival, like in terms of not being in survival mode constantly, people will slowly but surely transmute the ego into something a lot more beautiful. And as you said, I think in sort of 20, 30, 40 years time, I can see a world where we do share lawnmowers and we're not so sort of self-orientated. We're more plugged into the fact that we are all here completely by chance at the same time. We all have the same body parts. We're all made from the same stuff, and we do share the same experiences, the same troubles. And there's this kind of connectedness that we lose touch with when we're in that sort of independent mindset and that self-orientated mindset. And I can see at the moment, I feel like we're shifting into that more sort of connected mindset and that more togetherness approach.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm a massive fan of Gabor Mate, and I've trained with him. And he talks a lot about this disconnect with ourselves, with humanity. And I think, like you say, we're shifting more and more into that connection because we are all connected. However much we think we're not, we are. And that is such a wonderfully important thing to come back to. And I also feel like we're in the chaos stage as well. You know, when you're trying to clean your kitchen cupboards out, you have to take everything out first. I feel like we're in that mess, but then we'll put things back in a better way.
Yeah.
Clear the mess out.
That's exactly it.
I'm aware of your time, so just quickly before we finish, is there any particular tips that you could offer anyone that is recognizing a lot of this stuff? Anything to help reconnection or just slowing down?
Yeah, I'd say a quick sort of roundup would be, first of all, reading the book Self-Compassion by, I can't remember her name. There is a book called Self-Compassion, and it is life-changing when it comes to self-discovery and building a relationship with yourself.
We'll find it and link it in the show notes.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just taking 5 minutes out of your day if you're feeling particularly overwhelmed or overstimulated, and sort of just giving yourself a bit of, maybe putting your hands over your heart space and just saying, this is hard and I'm doing the best that I can. And that's enough. And just building a practice of really just sort of returning to yourself whenever life gets a bit too chaotic and your mind is going crazy. And then the second thing I'd say is just reach out to community, find your sparkly people, find your version of what feels good in terms of people that you resonate with, and run with it. Like, find them in every corner of every world you can possibly imagine, because it's so important. I think for me that was the spiritual crowd, but I don't think it matters who it is for you. It's just making sure that you feel heard and validated and valued by people, you know.
Yeah, so important to find your people, and once you find your people, you find more of them. It's great. So thank you so much for coming on. And if anyone is looking to connect with you, is there any places they can get in touch with you, or how would they be supported by you if they're interested in anything else?
So I function mostly on Instagram under the her.radiance.co. Same for Facebook. I'm functioning mostly on those two at the moment. I am setting up a website, but that's in due course. But I also host sort of online and in-person events. I've got one coming up for the locals of Bristol on the 25th of January. I'm doing a women's healing workshop, and that's all around somatics and energy healing and all of that lovely stuff. So yeah, I think if you wanted to attend any of the events, just go on to Eventbrite and search Meredith, probably Cairns-Palmer or something like that, and it should come up. But I can send you the link so you can link it to this podcast.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, because this will probably go out after January now. But cool, that's good to know that there's a place people can get in touch. And I would love to come to, I think you do women's circles as well, which, I would definitely be at one of those. Thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been great to show up as our true selves. This is the first time, surprisingly, I think I've cried on this, which
God,
most definitely a crier. So thank you again for coming on. Thank you for your time.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Calm Your Nervous System. I hope you found the conversation as interesting as I did. If you would like to start healing your nervous system, I have a free energy diary available just for podcast listeners, which will really help you see your blind spots about how you're spending your time and your energy. Find it at jennyadamscoach.co.uk/podcast. Find out more about me and somatic coaching in the show notes below. See you next time.